What happens if one day you sell everything and start a new life? This is what our guest Philip Botha, successful leadership coach and trainer, decided to do, leading to an amazing personal journey. Join us when he shares his deep insights into life and into how to shape your own destiny. Hello, Philip.
Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very nice, very great. I'm very happy to have you here today in the interview. You are a leadership coach and trainer, and I'm sure there's many things that would interest our audience that you can share, and I'm really curious about what we're going to talk about today. But just to get the audience have a better idea about who you are and where you come from, why don't you start off by giving a short introduction, a little snapshot of your history?
Okay, so I'm South African, born in South Africa in a one-horse town, and moved to Germany in, God, I almost forgot, but about 28 years ago, 1991. And, but being a South African, we have a saying that you can take somebody out of the bush, but you can't take the bush out of them. So even though I've been living in Germany now for almost 30 years, when I'm back in South Africa, I'm just still somebody from the bush.
From the bush. So what made you choose from South Africa move to a country like specifically to Germany?
It's strange because people always ask me that question, and normally they say to me, so how did you get to Germany? And I say, by plane. But you didn't ask me that question, thank you. And but the thing that really fired me up was adventure. And when I actually came to Germany, I knew very little about Germany. But it definitely was a sense of adventure. And as you can imagine, adventure is one of my values. And for me, what I do remember is that at the time, 1991, there was an enormous milestones in 1992 with the European Union. It had just been after the German wall came down, and I had the sense that here was a lot of new beginnings.
Okay.
And I had the deep sense to be part of that.
Did that have to do something with your professional development as well?
No, not really. Maybe, in a way that the feeling that I had, I was in marketing in South Africa, and the feeling that I had was almost like I could see where I was going to develop. I could almost see the path, and it didn't really excite me.
Okay.
And so it was, okay, sell everything and do the pilgrimage back to Germany, because my ancestors originally came from Germany in 1670. Which was about 20 years after South Africa was founded, or the first settlers settled in South Africa.
You just said something very striking, that you said sell everything. Did you literally really sell everything?
I sold everything.
Were you not afraid when you did that?
Now, with the knowledge that I have now, probably if I knew everything then that I know now, I wouldn't have. But, if you're really fired up by your values, by your sense of adventure, of the world is your oyster, it's that energy that carries you, and you think more about what you can create and what you can achieve, as opposed to what are the holes that I'm going to fall into.
You're saying that if you look back, or with the experience that you have today, maybe you would get second thoughts about
because now I know all the difficulties and the hardships that I faced, as we all do in our lives. And if I knew all of this, then maybe I would have said, "Ooh, that's too much." But that's the beauty of youth.
Right.
You don't care about that. All you think about is, what can I achieve? What can I create? Because you're still fired up by the energy of life. And, just talking about that, that's maybe something that as we get older in life, that we need to reflect on more, because when we are young, we are much more adventurous. we don't think about what can go wrong. We can only think about, well, maybe this could happen, and I'll take a chance on that.
Yeah. The world is a world of opportunities.
Absolutely.
And not, like you said, of pitfalls. What were can you give an example of one or two roadblocks or obstacles that you were maybe not even expecting when you moved to Germany? Maybe language, maybe German mentality? Or?
Well, you know, you move to a new culture, and it takes a while to really immerse yourself in the culture. It's my experience, the first 3 years are really difficult because you only have the experience that you have. But you literally have to learn a culture from new. Mm-hmm. And let's put it mildly, German is bloody difficult. And so, you know, there are many dinners, many times where you went out for drinks with people where you would just, yes. And you smile when everybody else smiles, but you have no bloody clue what they're saying. But if you persist, things change. And do I speak perfect German? No, of course not. But through the jobs that I had in marketing, I can actually be really, really good in refining, saying something in German, even though my grammar is not that good. But the concept of what you say and how you say it.
So, if I understand correctly, at least, let's say on the professional side, you were safe, that you immediately started with a job here in marketing when you came to Germany? Or was it really, literally, was nothing?
No, it was nothing. You know, I literally applied for many things. And life is what you create out of it. And it was funny because one of the first things that I obviously did is I went to Goethe Institute to learn to speak German, which was not that good. But over time you improve. And literally trying to find companies where I could apply for work, etc., because one of the difficult things is to be able to live here, you need an Aufenthaltsgenehmigung.
Yes.
To have an Aufenthaltsgenehmigung, you need to have an Arbeitserlaubnis. You don't get the one without the other, so it's like this chicken or egg thing. Mm-hmm. And so trying to find a job without either of those, you need to have an employer that really believes in you enough to say, okay, I'll go through this whole process for you. And, you know, I really believe in fate and destiny. You know, fate is what you get. Mm-hmm. That's the cards that life deals you. Destiny is what you make out of it. And at the time I was in Frankfurt, staying with friends, and I was reading through International Herald Tribune, and there was an ad for Lufthansa. And the ad was in English. Mm-hmm. But it was obviously written by a German copywriter because you could see there was quite a few, let's say, less perfect English sentences. And so I took the ad and I wrote a letter and I sent it to Young & Rubicam, the agency who was responsible for Lufthansa, and sort of said to them, well, you know, yes, you are professional. Yes, Lufthansa is a big international company. If you are going to do advertising in English, then maybe it's worth checking the language. Is there any way that I can help? And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I had a phone call. And the lucky thing was, and I got the job, by the way, and the lucky thing was that the guy who finally employed me went into the managing director's office, and there was a stack of CVs, and he was looking for somebody. And all he did, he just went through the stack of CVs, and for some of the reasons, saw this, thought this was cool, and from one thing led to the other. And so in life, you know, there are red lines. If you remember in Authentic Leadership, we spoke about the red lines that run through your life. That was one very, very strong milestone in my life. If you see something and you can hear the bells go off, mm-hmm. you have to follow that. And it was literally when I was looking at that ad, I heard bells go off.
A friend of mine once said, luck is when opportunity meets good preparation. Would you subscribe to that? At that
Yes,
point?
you know, there is, I'm sure you know it, but there is the other expression that says you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, you know, if you build awareness in life, you get to recognize those moments when they start happening. You know, some people call it synchronicity, other people call it coincidence. That's when the bells go off, and that's where you really need to sit up and take notice.
What you're saying sounds quite mature. At the same time, you mentioned beforehand that you were young, you were adventurous, maybe a little bit naive because you weren't able to foresee all the potential pitfalls there. So how would you describe that mix that would really describe you at that time?
Well, naive, of course. You know, if you come from the bush, okay, I didn't literally come from the bush, but if you come from the bush, it's compared to living in Germany, that is almost. So yes, there is a certain naivety that you will always have, but naivety is not necessarily negative. Mm-hmm. Naivety is really precious if you're able to be aligned with values. If you're really aligned with what you believe in, naivety can get you through the pitfalls of life. That was for me in my experience. Because sometimes when I sit back now and I think, my God, how did I do this? It was simply that. I just did what I believed was right.
That sounds, in the end, easy. Is it that easy?
It's easy, but you know, you get to a point where the big lessons in life come. Those are the hard lessons, but those are the lessons that really shape where you are.
And I think we will come to that in a moment. Right now, I would like to ask you another thing. I introduced you as a leadership coach and trainer. Right now, we are in that past where you are still working in marketing. Now, marketing, leadership, coaching, and training doesn't sound really like very close. So could you a little bit elaborate on what happened next? What made you change in the way that you started off from a now adventurous path, finding a job and the company that you mentioned? Everything sounded fine. So what happened next?
Well, what happened next was that I literally achieved what I always wanted. And then I lost it completely. So I was living in Frankfurt and working for Young and Rubicam, and it was about 8-9 years after I'd started working for them. And then I was headhunted to go to Universal Music International in London. And for me, you know, VP marketing internationally, that was like, wow, you've achieved it. And, you know, and this was 2001, just when Vivendi and Universal merged, where the dot-com bubble burst. So about almost a year after I joined, all of a sudden, you know, you hear these expressions last in, first out. You hear them, but when you get to experience them, that's where reality hits home. And that was hard. That was hard. So, and when it happened, I had this sense that, my God, in your whole life, it was just very simple. You just do what you believe is right. And I got there because I did what I believed was right. And all of a sudden, it ended. And I thought I'd done something wrong. And the sense of, well, my life is ending. And so that was really painful and really hard. But life is a hard taskmaster. And if I look back now, my perspective is very different. That's where my real life started. Everything beforehand was foreplay or dress rehearsal. That's where it really started.
It's interesting that you frame it like that. I'm sure in that moment when it happened, as you said, it felt like your world is kind of ending, or the world as you knew it was ending. How did you pull yourself out of that?
Well, you know, again, fate. If you create the space for things to happen in your life, things will happen. So now, you know, I've been working as a coach for almost 15 years. I've been working as a leadership trainer for more than 10 years. And if I look back now and I say so what is it that happened that put me here? That day when I lost my job, that was the first step. And then it's painful, you go down and you do the hero's journey and all that stuff. And small things happen. But again, you take notice because something is happening, you're not sure why. But here is something, you've got to take notice of it. So the first thing that happened is, actually I met an Australian friend and living in London at the time. And he invited me to go to a yoga class with him. Now I'd been meditating for years, but because of everything that'd been happening, I'd stopped meditating, sort of lost faith. And I didn't really want to, but I said, yes, okay. So went to the yoga class, you go doing yoga for the first time, it's all new and woo-woo and all of that stuff. And something very strange happened. It was within the first 10 minutes, and we were still doing sitting relaxation, whatever, and something deep inside hit me. And I had a sense of a depth of calm and inner calm that I couldn't remember. But the second thing that happened in that moment is I had this very, very deep sense. I need to become a yoga teacher. And I had no idea what that meant or what it entailed, but it was this deep, just sense of knowing. So, about some time later, I actually went back to Germany, and I was talking about becoming a yoga teacher, until somebody said to me, please, Philip, stop talking about it and just do it. And 3 weeks later, I was in an ashram doing my yoga teacher training.
Okay.
And so that definitely put me on a completely different trajectory, because it was in my path, absolutely. No question about it. And then the second thing that happened was also becoming a Reiki master. Also pure fluke. Something happens and leads to another thing, and all of a sudden you're presented with something. And those, let's say those two events and the continued development from that literally is what finally brought me to coaching. But the interesting thing was, I was working at Yahoo in Munich, and deciding, is this in alignment with what I want to do? Is this what I stand for? And there are times where you get upset and you say, okay, I'm out of here. And in that moment where the decision was, okay, yeah, this is it. And I didn't, I was sort of saying to myself, well, you've been in this situation before. Shouldn't you be scared? And I wasn't. And when everything had happened and I was on my way home, and it was like I was actually flying back to South Africa the next day, and I was thinking, shit, so what are you going to do? And in that moment, I'm going to become a coach. So 2 months before, the same person who took me to yoga class was on his way back to Australia and spent a weekend in Munich. And during the weekend told me about this amazing coaching course that he was busy doing with CTI. And I'd heard about it, sounded very interesting, but it just drifted away. But in that moment, back it was, this is fate. So I did my coaching training directly afterwards. And, and that was where everything started kicking in.
The way you tell that, it sounds like the moment you saw it, you understood that that's what you wanted to do.
I can't explain it. It's a deep sense that you have. Now, obviously, looking back, you have a better sense of it. And you can connect with it. But in that moment, here is something waving and saying, here's a bell ringing.
Mm-hmm. I want to quickly touch upon the practicalities of that. I mean, you've, in the end, given up a job where you were employed which also provides a certain level of safety, and understanding that this is not what you wanted to do. Instead, you wanted to become a coach. You took up that training and became certified as a coach. That in the end doesn't fill up your fridge.
No.
You said you were not so worried about that. You were not afraid about that. Can you maybe tell a little bit how from now I'm a certified coach, hire me. How does it work?
Of course, you're scared shitless. But you know, fear is, if you walk into fear, it's just smoke and mirrors. I know that now. I didn't know that then. But if you walk into fear, it's just smoke and mirrors. But the other thing is that if you go into fear, there is something deeply powerful and important for you. That if you go in it, that you can actually harness for yourself. I've now coached many people through fear. It always is there. And that's what I've found. So the story continues because just as I was starting to do getting my first coaching clients, a friend of mine had resigned from the PR agency that he was working with. And his first client was a marketing project. So he asked me to help him. And I realized that, well, his marketing background isn't very strong. So I decided to help him, and 6 months later, I had a PR agency. So I had a coaching practice and I had a PR agency. And for the next 8-9 years, you know, if I didn't have the PR agency, it would have been a lot more difficult. Again, this is my experience in life. If you live in alignment with your values and your purpose, strange things happen.
You've been mentioning this now more than once, talking about values and your purpose. Could you share a little about what that means for you? Maybe not specifically your values or your purpose, but...
No, that's fine, yeah. How can I describe it? And this is my belief, this is my experience as a coach. You know, we all talk about values in politics, in business, etc. You know, trust, respect, all of those things. We all react to it. My experience as a coach is that each person has his own unique set of values that is inherent in the person. It's not something you choose, it's something that is part of you. If you are able to discover them, develop them, that is what gives you not only the courage, but also the direction with which you can live your life. It just makes your life a lot easier. But if you're able to do that, strange things happen in your life. And purpose is even deeper. So when I did my purpose when I did my coaching training, and life purpose is nothing else but, you know, what is the essence of why I am alive, why I am here? I know it's just a symbolic, short little statement. But if you connect to the energy of that, great things can happen. So for me, the fundamental understanding in all of this was, you know, going back to the cliche that was used a lot in that time, body, mind, and soul. And for me, mind was coaching. The body was yoga, even though actually body is energy. And the soul was all about Reiki, or vice versa. But for me, there is a unique combination in those three that I use in coaching and in training all the time.
What you're saying is obviously very spiritual. And I'm sure what would be interesting for our audience is as well to understand for them how to turn that into something concrete and specific, something tangible, something more pragmatic or concrete. Could you maybe give an example where you say, this is how your values or how your purpose turned into a specific action as in your profession or even in your private life?
I have a couple of examples, and I will give you an example, but you know, just going back to the word that you used, spiritual. Most people are shit scared of the word spiritual because it's what I can't touch. And people have this association with spiritual that it's all religious. It's not. Spiritual, from when I use the word spiritual, it's just everything that is inside of us that is deeper than just my intellect or my assumptions. So it is that deep sense of knowledge that we have, you know, where our intuition is based, where our deep knowledge of what's right and wrong. And if you develop that awareness through meditation, through yoga, that becomes much stronger than if you continuously run away from it. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody has the choice to live his life as he or she wants. So if you choose not to live a spiritual life, that's okay. But if you really want to unlock your life, there is a lot more inside you than what your mind tells you. So going back to, I said earlier that if you work with your values, magic can happen. And when I had just finished doing my coaching training, and I started getting my first coaching clients, I was faced with the question, do I build my coaching practice, or do I help this friend who was faced with a marketing project that I, from my experience, felt this is not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the question that I had for myself was, which is more important to do? And the question that I answered for myself was through my values. Who do you serve? Do you do what you want first, or are you there for other people? So, and this is literally going in alignment with my values and my life purpose. So I decided to help him. There was no intention of getting an agency. That was the furthest thing from my mind. So all of that happened as a direct result of the choices that I was making as a result of my values and purpose. Make sense for you?
It does. At the same time, it's amazing to hear that the moment you decided, I'm clear about my values, I'm clear about my purpose, and I follow that, that it also enables you to, in the end, have success. No matter how we want to measure that, I'm not telling you financially, but in the end of the day, you are creating your own business. You need, as I said before, fill your fridge. So I think it's quite striking that following your values, doing the right thing, if you'd like to call this like this, also enabled you to do the other one, and not like it's completely separate things.
So let me use your metaphor. If I was going to fill my fridge with coaching growing up in that way, I would not even have filled my fridge. But the result of doing it the other way, I not only filled my fridge, I had much more than I believed was possible. And that is my experience of what happens if you do it, call it the right way.
I would like to shift gears a little bit now.
Okay.
And touch or go a little bit deeper with the topic of coaching itself. You say you are focused on leadership groups that you provide coaching or where you give training, and obviously, or my assumption is that the reason why people would have you as a trainer or coach is that they stand in front of questions or want to reach a target that they feel they cannot reach without being trained or coached. Obviously, on the other hand, when we talk about leaders, these are already people that have reached a certain level of, let's say, professional success, to say the least. Otherwise, they would not be in that position. Do you see some kind of patterns what are typical questions that leaders confront you with, where they seek your guidance?
Not really. And I know that sounds strange. When I coach people, and this is just my process, as a coach, we are there to serve other people. But from my training, from my experience, if I start working with a coachee, regardless of who he is or who she is, the first thing I do is start working with values. because that's the roadmap that you keep coming back to. Those are the pillars that you keep coming back to. And then everything shifts and changes. So, yes, I've had people come to me and say, and start off with, I want to make more money. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, the specific person who came to start making more money ended up saving 3 factories when the company that she was working with wanted to close those factories because there was a huge bankruptcy somewhere in the US. People come to coaching, but the reason why they come to coaching very seldom is the real reason why they come for coaching. At least my experience. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to come to me and say, I want to go to gym more often. I'm not the person to help you. And I will say to you, sorry, this is not what it's about. Most often if people come to me, there is an underlying reason why they're coming to me, but they're not even aware of. Remember the bells that I was speaking about earlier? Mm-hmm. And I've just gotten used to that. So there is an undercurrent, undercurrent synchronicity in life. How people find their way to coaching. Most of the work that I do at the moment is leadership training. So the coaching clients that I have, they are more relying on synchronicity, a coincidence, because that's where also interesting things happen.
And what's your impact on these leaders?
The way that I look at my impact is simply if they are able to develop themselves and become more than who they just physically are, then you've helped them. I don't necessarily hold on to the results that they achieve, or it's what I remember is more the growth of the person. Mm-hmm. And who they are becoming. And a coaching relationship doesn't necessarily last that long, 3 months, maximum 6 months. So people move in and then move on. So you focus on who the person is becoming. You don't necessarily see all the choices that they're making.
You said that ultimately the questions, or the real questions that you're dealing with during your coachings can be of really various nature. Mm-hmm. Still, and I was asking you for patterns, still when you want to understand whether the degree of success of being coached and reaching the goal that ultimately the coachee is working on with you, do you see some patterns there? What are like prerequisites, or what are criteria you say this is a necessary ingredient or a very helpful ingredient to make the personal development more likely to succeed?
It sounds banal, but it's the ability to make better choices.
Is that such difficult?
Yeah, because, if you think about that, how often are you unsure, insecure about choices that you've already made?
Mm. Well, I can say that happens.
Yeah,
and not just.
And so the thing in a coaching session is that, people come with a reason why the session, or a topic for the session, and you start exploring. So maybe there is a first topic or reason, but what I find very often, there's also an underlying, something that's bubbling, that needs clarity. So clarity of choice is what propels people forward. Now, in a coaching session, I may help support or get more clarity about a certain topic or a certain choice. The impact of this choice is not something that I would necessarily see, because that's not something that you share in a coaching session. I'm not. If there is a leader or a CEO or whatever who wants to have a coaching session on, is this the right merger? He's not going to come to me. But if it's a CEO who really wants to make a difference in how he leads the company and how he can leverage his leadership in the company, I don't get to see what the leverage is.
Mm-hmm. And in that, is there anything where you'd say it requires a certain level of openness, a certain level of maybe spirituality, what we mentioned before, or can anybody experience such a development when being coached?
People are different. People are at different levels of personal development. So maybe in your bag of coaching tricks, coaching tools, whatever you want to call it, with some people, it's easier to work at a deeper level. Mm-hmm. Whereas with other people, you are just working, let's say, with the basic questions and the basic curiosity. It's what's right for the person. So it's not that you judge as a coach. The person and their situation, that's where you are. That's what you support. So it's irrelevant whether it's, let's say, a high potential, mm-hmm. but maybe doesn't have the life experience of a CEO who's been working for the last 30 years, mm-hmm. and who has been coached many times and has done a lot of development work. So where you can start working at a much deeper and much more fundamental level. Mm-hmm. That's where they are, and that's where you're working. You know, yes, obviously there are coaches who say, I don't work with anybody who's not on the sea level. Mm-hmm. For me, that's a bit presumptuous. Because if you work with somebody who's a high potential, and you can just help them understand one fundamental thing, imagine the impact that can have for the rest of that person's life.
What impact does it have on you?
It just brings me joy, happiness. For me, the fulfillment, that's what the success is. That is what the success is. Let's say the physical success, that happens in a different way, but that's not where the motive is. Mm-hmm. It sounds banal, but it's a calling.
And do you sometimes have moments where you, through coaching somebody else, get an insight for your own life? I mean, did your work impact your own life, your lifestyle, your way of looking at things?
Of course. You know, you're constantly, you're a mirror for people if you're a coach. Mm-hmm. So you draw from not your intellect, you draw from your experience, from what life gives you in the questions that you ask. Mm. And very often you come up with something where you think, wow, why don't I ask that for myself? So it is that constant interplay. You know, if I run a leadership workshop, hell, I learn as much from the people that I support than they learn from me. The process may be a little bit different.
Can you give an example of maybe one or two encounters where you say that really had a strong impact on you? Somebody that you met, or in some event that happened?
Let me think of one. I'll give you two. I've coached a lot of people at different levels of depth through fear. And I said to you that fear is like smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. If you have the courage to walk into it, and not try and get away from it, around it, avoid it, whatever, if you really walk into it, there is something deeply powerful for you that you can harness. So I said before that I had a PR agency, and the day also came where I was deeply unhappy and I realized something's not right. Strange enough, that day I was in the room next door to where we are right now. And I got back to the airport in Munich, and this sense was still with me. And I realized that, by God, my time for end marketing had really, really come. And immediately I faced that fear of, so if you leave this, where are you going to get your income from?
Mm-hmm.
You know, even coaches need to have bread and butter on the table. And the first reaction when I saw that fear, and I felt it was just like a wave that hit me, I said, so what do you tell your clients? And the first thing came up was, well, you know, fear is just smoke and mirrors. And you can see I'm still breathing deeply. And that's what I had to do and say, okay, straight through. And you know what? It never materialized. And what I discovered was that actually I was able to, without even doing a business plan, without even all of that, I was able to earn more money than I ever believed was possible. It's not important to me. But the base of that fear proved to be, I just never had to worry about it. But if I had reacted to that fear, that dog would have led me along a garden path for a very, very long time. The second one, maybe a different kind of story, is I use a lot of pictures in my training. And one day I was in a workshop and somebody held up a picture and talking about a picture, but something that the person said about this picture just made me realize something that's deeply important for me. And I still have that picture. And every time in a workshop when I see that picture, that's the mirror, that's the reminder.
But you don't want to share exactly what
triggered
in you? Or
no, it was very simple. It's a very strange picture. The picture is of a woman with her head in a bucket. Mm-hmm. So it looks very strange. And when I saw that picture, it just reminded me of that, you know, coming to Germany, that joy of, you know, looking at life as if you were just born. So where is life at its most powerful is when you take your head out of the bucket and you look at life with fresh eyes, and not like the proverbial ostrich with his or her head in the sand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, you know, and we get used to things, and that's when we have our head in the bucket. So for me, that picture is always the reminder, take your head out of the bucket, because probably it's been there longer than you want it to be.
So I already have a plan when you next time want to take your head out of the bucket, change your life completely?
Well, it's not just change your life, but if you look at life with fresh eyes, you see things that you've been missing.
Fresh eyes in a constant way, in a different word, is that mindfulness?
Well, that's what mindfulness comes to.
Mm.
But mindfulness, you know, comes from the inside, not from the outside.
When you speak about that, it sounds also natural. Is that hard to learn?
You know, mindfulness is this new, well, not that new, but this catchphrase. Mm-hmm. And for me, mindfulness is something that starts inside. It's not just running outside and saying, oh, how green are the trees and how blue is the sky. If you develop yourself, and, you know, I met a Buddhist monk a while ago, and he gave me a different perspective on mindfulness. And, you know, he said, mindfulness, if you translate it from Sanskrit, is really about introspection. If you practice introspection and you reflect, the payout will be looking at everything with different eyes. And then you start seeing things that you never did before. So now when you start looking at the tree, you see something that you didn't look before. Mm-hmm. But you could look as hard as you want to without that introspection, and you won't see it.
And since this is such an important concept and fundamental to a lot of things that you were elaborating on in this interview so far, maybe you could share with the audience a small idea or a clue, maybe a tool or technique that would make it easier for those people to facilitate that themselves. How can I become more or exercise more introspection? How can I be more in that way of interpreting the term mindful?
Well, you know, if you, and this is just my perspective, if you really want to start doing that, the simplest way, find a yoga school, go start doing yoga, because that will really have an impact on your life. And I mean, it's not just about doing it and stretching, but really try and get into that. Yoga is about developing yourself from an energetic point of view. It's not just physical. That's the simplest way. But if you don't want to do that, you know, sit and start focusing on your breathing. And try and clear your mind and only focus on your breathing. And if you do that, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, at some stage you'll start noticing a difference. You know, the other techniques, you need to be a little bit more, let's say, practical in terms of teaching it. But simply sitting, breathing, and only focusing on your regular breath, that's a simple technique that you can use. But that they will teach you in yoga anyway.
I think I have to go back to yoga. I have to admit I tried that once, but what you are saying is really kicking me a little bit to pick it up again. Philip, that was such an honor and such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for having you.
Thank you for having me, and for me it was a privilege in having this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
If you like this video, leave us a comment and click on that like button so we can continue to create content that you like to see.